Thank you again, and nice to be back again. And Sarah, welcome back to Abu Dhabi.
Thank you.
I think we're going to see a few clips, few minutes of the film called Abu Dhabi, which was a commission, our first commission actually, of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. And as it comes on, can we see the film back there? Maybe you can let's just start with that since we're here and you're back. Is that Zaki's library?
Yes. It seems to be slowed down.
Okay, we're going to let this run for a few minutes, but we love this film. And what's interesting is, you shot it in 2016. You went to places that some of us who have been coming many years have not been ourselves. You did extraordinary archival research as well as travel. You got access to things that we're still wondering how you got access to. And you spent a lot of time here. And yet now that we're coming back, almost 10 years later, it already feels like a period piece. It already feels like it's of its time. And at the time when we looked at it, it felt so futuristic. So,
well, that's an interesting thing about my films is that obviously they're not documentaries. They're not meant to be documentaries, but of course they do become time capsules. They do contain a certain moment and a certain set of situations that I place myself in. And I've always wanted to be in those situations. And it's like, it's a very different universe than the studio, which is very slow. And I'm painting, and time with the films is very elastic in the sense of I'm having many conversations with lots of different people who I want to have those conversations. And with film and painting, it could be argued that, time is a resource that you have, that you're constantly aware of how expensive everything is, especially when you're shooting film. So, time is money. You're working sort of against the clock with a schedule that you've created ahead of time, that you budgeted, and you have to fit everything into that. It's a little bit like a ship in a bottle.
So your films have been described as a biography of a city, as a psychology of a city, and as you said, a documentary of a city. But they're the way they're put together and the way you cut it, and then of course these incredible musical scores transform all of that evidence into something very abstract. So can you tell us about that process and what is that structure of abstraction? And
I'm not sure if I can completely explain the process, honestly, but I don't view the films as documentary. I really view them as almost like a fiction, a form of fiction. Partly the fiction is of the place, meaning like some of the fiction comes from elsewhere, some of it I add to. Some of it is reality, of course, and these things merge together and they create something that's quite alchemical. You're not really sure where things stop and where they start. With the Abu Dhabi film, of course, I came here a couple of times, I think even to give a talk when I first came to do my scout, and it was then that I decided that absolutely the Falcon Hospital was going to be part of the film, and that was because of a conversation I had with somebody over dinner where I learned about the doctor who's in love with the Falcons, and I just thought, well, I have to meet this person, absolutely, and she has to be in the film. So it becomes like a list, a moving list. Of course, you have a wish list. I have a wish list of everything I'd like to depict in the film, everything I'd like to capture. Some things become images in the films. Other things, maybe I get thwarted, and other images don't ever become an image. But if something doesn't become an image, it doesn't mean that it's not in my mind and it doesn't shape the work in some other way. It might become a title, it might become part of the paintings, it might become part of the way I think about the process of making the work. If something gets stopped.
You're talking in a very systematic way.
Yeah.
Like it's as a system of images, which we'll get to because we're also very interested in your education at Brown University in semiotics, which of course makes total sense the moment you start talking to Sarah Moriss. Of course she studied semiotics. Of course she wrote a manifesto at age 21. But what is your emotional connection? I mean, that system it's not at all a rigid system in your case, but it is
it's quite intuitive, actually.
It's very intuitive. So
it's very intuitive, and
and
it's interesting because I just shot a film in Hong Kong where I'm going to tomorrow, and it's called ETC. And there was an article that came out a week ago about it called Outside Looking In. I don't really see things that way. I don't view it like there's an outside and there's an inside and I'm on the outside looking in, or I'm on the inside talking to people. I just view it as much more fluid than that. The idea of national identity, the idea of place, the idea of all of the people that might be in a place working, doing their jobs, doing different sites of production. So to me, it's really making the films is without sounding ridiculous. Making the films is a way of having conversations with people that I wouldn't necessarily be having conversations with as an artist.
Yeah.
And maybe even learning from those people about situations that I'm not in or I should be in, or there's some aspect there of comparing the idea of like what it is to be an artist to these other types of professions and these other types of histories, and trying to think like what could you learn from these situations that you could use in your art, or what things you want to repudiate that you think are not good. So it's, do
you read a lot before? Just reading or does that get in the way?
I read a lot. Yeah, I read a lot.
Or is it really more, of course you read a lot.
But not as much as I'd like to.
Is it driven more by intuition,
It's driven more, well, of course I read a lot, but I mean, I'm reading obviously a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of news, a lot of political writing. In whether it's The Guardian, Washington Post, New York Times, I'm reading a lot. I'm definitely very aware of what is going on, but I would have to say that the context of the films is really like a chain of places, and it's not like I don't really feel like any one place is isolated or independent, that it's like it is part of a chain, not only just, I guess when I say a chain, I mean like not only a chain of my work, obviously there's that aspect of a chain, but a chain in the sense of like there is no place that's really independent fully. Right.
That's so true.
And we all are incredibly aware of that now.
Well, I think that also brings us to the if we could switch to the paintings. I think Sarah's made a beautiful. Okay, great. I think that also brings us to our topic of time, because yes, they're not documentaries. They might be biographies. They are certainly abstractions. They're very intuitive kind of, and they're not exactly collages either.
But they're not really biographies, because, I remember when I did the Los Angeles film and showing that film in Los Angeles, at one point we did a special screening at CAA, the talent agency, but then we did another screening because it was like nominated for short documentary in the Oscar division, and somebody stood up and was like, this isn't Los Angeles, this is like the film world. Of course, it's not, my films aren't trying to portray a democratic idea of place.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's like a shared thing. It's my version of a place. It's my, and in some of that aspect, it definitely involves fiction. Just as New York City is not all corporations, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
no, of course, speculation and fiction. So let's go back to Brown first, and then we're going to talk about the relationship of the paintings, which are also urban, which are also structures, which are also looking at patterns. But there's also this crisis that sort of undergirds all of your work, and that brings us back to all the cities that you've well, whatever verb you want to use, let's just say filmed, made art with. You know, what combines those cities? What is the kind of connective tissues between the cities you choose? Because to me, they are about the now. They are about the crisis of our time. They are coming out of the news. There is something existential and deeply dark about them.
Absolutely. Well, I think of cities as conspiracies. One's absolutely, it has to be said, and it's not really clear whose conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's our conspiracy in the sense we're all complicit with these places. We're all complicit with the meaning of where we are and where we live and how we're participating, you know, in the society that we're participating with, and I think about that a lot. And in terms of like the decision making of how it works in terms of, I mean, I'll give you an example. Like while I was shooting Los Angeles, there was several. You know, there was a whole controversy about Steven Spielberg being the director of the 2008 Olympics. And he stepped away from directing it. I heard it was because of a writer's strike in the actual fact, but it was speculated about what the meaning of that sort of abdication was. And then I sort of thought, what better form to go from this sort of industry that is dealing with the individual, which is, you know, the Los Angeles film world. Yeah. The role of the individual, the role of the celebrity, the role of the actor, director, writer. What better juxtaposition than to go from that role of the ego to this idea of, you know, the nation state, which is like, you know, to shoot film during the 2008 Olympics. So sometimes I will do some sort of form of ping pong with the subject matter itself, you know?
Yeah, and that film was shown in China, of course, and also shown in the Guggenheim's Art in China After 1989 exhibition, Theater of the World. You were the only non-Chinese in that exhision.
Really? I heard it was me and Rem Koolhaas.
Oh, yes, Rem Koolhaas, right. Yeah. Forgot about him. But a very important interjections into the stories we were trying to present.
Well, I loved making that film, you know, because it was, for me, when I told people I was making a film in China, everybody was like, no, there was no art world in China, right?
Yeah.
There was nothing there, and people had no idea, like, why are you doing that? Why would you want to do that? And it was really interesting to go there at that time, and I'm talking about like 2005, 2006, when I started to do research and go there, and I knew I wanted to make a series of paintings also. And I loved the whole structure of Beijing being all these series of ring roads and how you never knew where you were. And I started to do that research, and I also really love that film because at the same time that
this is it here. Yeah.
Oh yes. At the same time that there's this heightened spectacle, which we'll call the Olympics, which is conceived by a group in Switzerland, right? That has nothing to do with wherever it's happening. Like the control center is Switzerland, seems, or it is. And yet you have all of this activity going on in a place that is self-determined, and yet the spectacle is the spectacle, but also the spectacle can be ignored, right? It doesn't have, you know, there's many things going on at any one moment. And I think that's really the modus operandi for the films, is really that simultaneity of how many meanings, how many activities can be going on in one place.
Yeah, and quotidian life just keeps carrying on, and people are there.
And these things can be at odds even though they are in the same place. And people might perceive it as all unanimous, but it's actually not. No.
I think there, even with all the darkness we talked about, there is this kind of, you know, hapless humanity in your films also. There are people sweeping and driving and sitting and waiting for their falcon to be.
There's a great scene in the Beijing film, actually, with the taxi driver who's just like taking a nap. I just love the way they just sort of take naps in public. It's
ignoring
like it wouldn't really occur to us to use public space.
Thing going on around them. So let's talk a little bit. We've been watching some of your paintings come by, and we're beginning to see some of the relationship. Is this a Olympics one?
No, that's a painting from the Rio series, and that was Jockey Club Brasileiro.
So can you begin to tell us about where do these paintings come from? And it's so unusual for multidisciplinary artists to have achieved such technical proficiency into such radically different medium. Of course, one moving, one flat. But tell us about the medium. Why do you use house paint? Why are they so glossy? What is this structure about? And how do they relate to your films? And let's bring it back to time, because you and I have had that conversation.
Well, in terms of, first of all, it has to be said, I didn't go to art school, right? So, you know, the use of household paint is just because it was obviously there's a history in in the history of modern art of using household paint, from
minimalism,
from Frank Stella to Warhol and there's been a number of people who've used household paint. You know, it's not. I didn't invent that, but there's a sort of DIY aspect to using the simplicity of going to the hardware store and just getting paint, and I think that comes from my knowledge of those artists and from a lack of fetishizing the artistic process, right? Like I always loved the idea of that, you know, these things should be sort of automatic forms, that, you know, yes, it actually takes quite a lot of labor to make them, but they should appear as if they just somehow came into the world, right? So, I mean, I love that. And I suppose I started thinking about making paintings when my first studio was in Times Square, which was in a building that was slotted to be redeveloped.
Times Square, New York City.
Times Square, New York City, and it was on 42nd Street, and I had no lease. It was just month to month. And there was a landlord who really loved artists, and I had a fantastic deal. And I started making paintings in that space. And I really felt like I was at the center of Manhattan, right? Like at that point, it felt like that. And it was extremely loud. It felt precarious. It felt even a little dangerous. There was a guy with a loudspeaker.
Before it got cleaned up.
Yeah, that was Giuliani who, quote, cleaned it up. And I really thought a lot about commercial space. Why? Because I knew that the building I was in Times Square, which literally should have been like the most expensive real estate in the world, or some of the world. And I was aware that it was slotted to become this commercial space of Disney and all these other things that were going to be slotted to go into that area. So I was aware of the fluctuation of the value of space right from the beginning. Of course, you are anywhere in the city, but I was heightened aware because my studios was literally, you know, hanging on a thread, because I knew the city was going to redevelop the neighborhood.
Writers have called it the belly of the beast.
The belly of the beast. And I started to think about what the depiction of commercial space or the depiction of space means. And that's really how I started to paint. I started thinking about the adrenaline and the noise of the city around me, and how it affected me, and how it propelled me, and how it motivated me, how it repulsed me. And that's how I started coming up with these images in my mind.
You can see it. I mean, what's amazing as you speak, it really does look like propulsion and cacophony and a little bit
and there
of
is a sound. There is a
little
sound.
bit of boogie woogie.
Yeah, there is a sound element, I mean, to the paintings. There, in the sense of like the movement of the, I think about this a lot, the movement of the eye, how it's not really controllable, and how it moves and how it pulses.
Yeah.
And I think about that also as I'm composing the images too.
How do you compose them? Or do you draw them first?
I do drawings always first. And I mean, before I even compose them, I think they're already, in a way, they're sort of after images of looking at things.
Yeah.
So I think I see the forms before I draw them, then I draw them, then it obviously goes to the computer, and I do all of my compositions using a computer. I mean, I didn't originally, but now, of course, for years I have used a computer.
And then what do you do? How does it get projected?
And then everything is in black and white. In the computer, it's all like black and white, and there's a whole phase where it's just composition and it's just black and white. And if you come to my studio, you'll see hundreds of these black and white drawings all over the place. And then only at the end do I start to conceive things in color and start to think about the palette of place and how I'm thinking about communicating through color.
So some of these paintings, many of them are related to the films. I want to come back to your different conceptions of time.
But they're parallel. They're not like, I think what you said earlier is this, my practice, which could be seen as, right hand, left hand, is it could be two different artists. Yeah. It actually could be, but it's not, obviously. But it could be. It could be the work of two separate careers, right? But the fact that it's married in one is because it's me, first of all, and second of all, it's they feed each other, right? Yeah. They have very different tempos of production, meaning my paintings are very systematic. They're very slow. I can't rush them. There's only so much I can do on them each day. And they take time. And then in the space of that time, I'm thinking about a lot of other things. I'm reading, I'm having conversations with people all over the world, and I'm thinking about the next film I'm going to be making, or I'm thinking about the permissions that I need to get for the films, or, or all the different things, the logistics of filmmaking.
Do you love the craft of painting?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Do you paint with a brush?
I use varnish brushes. Yes, I use actually varnish brushes for boats.
Do you like the slowing down of the practice of painting?
For me, I like the practice of painting. I like how slow it is.
Yeah.
And in that slowness of the painting, I'm able to do this other thing. Yeah. So it actually, you could look at as the paintings and the films are codependent. The paintings allow me to have the time and the space and the energy for a lot of other things.
It's like a form of thinking.
And also it's good for me to slow down. It's also like an enforced...
Can you imagine this woman slowing down? It's sort of hard to imagine.
No, but it's good for me to slow down. It's sort of like the paintings are like an enforced slowing down of time and focusing. Yeah, this act of being patient, which I'm not really good at, I have to be for the paintings. So they're almost a sort of...
So one last idea that came up in our conversations, and I think we do have time to open it up if there are questions, because it's such a fascinating practice, and we have so many practicing artists in this space who are using both visual arts and studio arts and sound and film and the moving image and time-based. So it's fantastic that you're here sort of at the end of our 3 days, because a lot of the ideas you're touching on ricochet with topics that have come up over the last few days here. But you mentioned to me in talking about this that your different uses of time, both in your film and in the episode, which posit the problematics of the contemporary moment. So, two last questions for you. Let's talk about the problematics of the contemporary moment, why that fascinates you, and how that manifests in the paintings and in the film. The problematics of the moment, because again, that brings us back to the subject of time.
It manifests in the fact that I have a desire to be an artist, right? It manifests in the desire to actually produce and to keep producing and to make things and to sort of push it out into the world. That it manifests in that respect. It also manifests in the choice of my subject matter.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about when I speak of commercial space, we're surrounded by commercial space. We're now carrying around commercial space on our bodies all the time. We're looking at commercial space in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Commercial space. We are commercial space.
We heard about that earlier today. Yeah. We're being colonized.
Our data ourselves is commercial space.
Yeah. Our time is too.
So, yes. So I think about that a lot. Of course, I'm complicit with it too, like we all are. It's very hard not to be, I don't really think it's possible to have a boundary between these things now. It's quite impossible. It could be argued that there was never really an inside and an outside ever with the avant-garde, you know?
Brings me to abstractions, because you've spoken of Malevich, you've spoken of seeing yourself in the lineage, a rather strict lineage of abstraction, and of course there's so many artists, including Mondrian, of course, who also use the city as a structure, the architecture, the grid, vertical and horizontal of the modern urban planning. Can you talk to us about abstraction? It's something we all think about a lot here in the region.
I mean, again, I didn't go to art school, so I never really thought about I didn't really think about art historical terms of abstraction or different forms of art. I knew I was interested, I can tell you I was very interested in the work of Hans Hacke. I was very interested in the work of Marcel Bruytaris, Donald Judd, Barbara Kruger, Louise Lawler, Sherry Levine. I mean, I was aware of all of these artists as I was studying, and it became clear to me that I wanted to for me, making abstraction, or what you call abstraction, I mean, sometimes it hovers on the edge of abstraction, but I would say probably it is abstraction. I would think that this form that I do of making paintings is really about a depiction of the space we are in this contemporary moment, which is going back to this idea of commercial space. I do see my work as almost like a form of monopoly, a form of moving and appropriating space. Like, why can't you make Los Angeles your own? Why can't you make Abu Dhabi your own? Why can't you make Hong Kong? Like, why can't you, as an artist, how come you can't put yourself in these positions and make these forms, make these situations your own, make them your reference points? So in a way, the films could be seen as a way of making a manifesto or taking control of my own reference system.
I love that. That's quite radical in some of today's discourses. I think we have time for one question to our brilliant Sarah Moriss, who I've been so honored to talk to today. Any questions out there? Yes, no, maybe? Any questions? Yes? Oh, there he is, Jitish. Couldn't see you in the dark.
Well, it's not so much a question as a remark. You spoke in binaries between the two sort of limbs of your practice, so to speak. I mean, one bifurcation that seems to happen is the presence of the human form and the absence of the human form in the other. And I think I've just, it'd be nice to hear you speak about this particular aspect between the paintings and the films in your practice.
Well, when you say the human form and the lack of the human form, I think of the machine a lot. When I talk about the commercial space and the commercial space that we are all carrying around, I think of the role of the machine in the history of contemporary art interests me a lot. One artist I didn't mention when I was giving my line of all the artists that I feel like have influenced me, also Picabia, too. I think about the role of the machine.
Yeah.
So, in my films, it goes back and forth. It vacillates between this machine-like roving of like all of the things that you could capture, and then also moments that are, I would say, resistance, the moments that are deeply human, that are actually in counterposition to this machine-like dominance of, the contemporary world. So I think of them both in the same way. And then with the paintings, it was very clear to me very early on, I did not want to have evidence of the hand. I did not want to be making sort of expressionistic work. I liked this idea, coming from Brotaris and coming from Donald Judd and coming from Warhol, of almost like an automatic work or a form that in the two poles of, as you said, the human and the non-human.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much. Welcome back to Abu Dhabi.